It was a cold September night in 1961. A couple were driving home through the White Mountains of New Hampshire in the US state of New England. That couple go by the names of Betty and Barney Hill. Whilst driving home one evening, they hadn't seen another person or vehicle for miles, and they claimed the overall journey felt really eerie and something just didn't seem right. Betty and Barney Hill claimed that as they hit a certain stretch of road through the White Mountains, a strange light appeared, and although at a distance, they were convinced it was following them. In this video, we take a look at 2 stories from 6 different people who all claim they were abducted. This is episode 2. But did you know? UFOs, or unidentified flying objects, have been spotted over the globe for years. In 2020 alone, up to June, there were some reported 4,688 sightings. And although most sightings, I'm certain, will have some pretty simple explanation, there are some cases that even leave experts scratching their heads. When Betty and Barney finally arrived home at Portsmouth in the early hours of the morning, they claimed that they were far from relieved. Both of their watches had stopped working, and they couldn't help but notice rips in Betty's clothing and deep scuffs to Barney's shoes. On top of this, a whole 2 hours of the journey could not be accounted for. If we take a look at the research of missing time, it says that sometimes it's referred to as abduction phenomenon, or even alien abduction syndrome. However, there are some health professionals that say this could simply be, in some cases, put down to things such as false memory syndrome or even sleep paralysis. Betty was asked about the size of the craft. She explained how it was as big or as long as her house. The story goes on to say that both Mr. and Mrs. Hill are adamant that they were examined for a fair while, and then the beings went on to erase part of their memories before releasing them. With the help of a psychiatrist, Mr. and Mrs. Hill claim that a startling and chilly story started to be revealed. Relaxed and under supervision, Mr. and Mrs. Hill start to reveal the missing time gaps. They start to remember scary images and flashbacks of faded grey beings with large eyes, and next to their vehicle, it didn't take long before they claimed they were led to a large dish-shaped craft located directly in front of them. The full experience would kick off a full Air Force inquiry, and this was actually part of the Project Blue Book investigations. Project Blue Book investigated UFO sightings right across the United States. This incident would also become the first ever widely publicized alien abduction account and would shape how stories similar would be told and understood. Mr. and Mrs. Hill actually wrote an illustration of the abduction. It goes into a lot more detail. One thing we know is that Barney worked a night shift at a post office and would drive a 120-mile round journey, whereas Betty handled state child welfare cases. Mr. and Mrs. Hill had been married 16 months and were devoted to their local church. Barney also claims that he was a skeptical type of man and never before now would have believed in anything like flying saucers or other beings. On the other hand, Barney's most memorable experience was when they removed his false teeth, but he does go into details of also having hair and fingernails clipped at one point. The story takes another turn as Betty goes into details of speaking with the leader of the beings, asking where they were, but she's unclear still and only mentions talks of a map that was briefly shown to her. That's pretty much where the first part of the story ends. The story at the time was picked up by local newspaper Boston and was simply the talk of the town. The Hills, I'm sure, are not the first that have claimed to have been abducted, and they most certainly will not be the last.
We've got reports of an unidentified flying object over the lake, over.
15 years later, in August 1976, 4 students from Massachusetts College had been canoeing on Maine's Allagash Wilderness Waterway when all of a sudden an unidentified flying object passed close by. After some 30 seconds of it hovering in the distance, it vanished as quickly as it came. It was August 20th, just 2 days later, when the 4 students were back on the lake when the bright object reappeared. The light was very bright, almost as bright as the sun, and after attempting to grab the attention of the flying craft, they mention how it followed them as they tried to paddle back to shore. In the space of a second, and as quick as a flash, they all realize that they're on the shore. The unidentified craft is nowhere to be seen. All 4 students claim to have started a campfire before entering the lake. The fire was now completely out. There were several hours that simply could not be accounted for. Upon arriving home, the men did tell their families. However, their families found it extremely hard to believe such a story could have taken place. That is until 12 years later, in 1988. 2 of the 4 students, Jack and Jim, began to have rather strange nightmares of sitting on a bench with their friends and feeling fearful for their lives. After contacting UFO researcher Ray Fowler, the 4 men agreed to try hypnosis. Each person agreed to go in separately and they would not speak in between sessions. Each of the 4 men all had very accurate stories that seemed to definitely match. Each student goes on to say whilst under hypnosis how they'd been abducted and probed back in 1976. Samples of skin and bodily fluids had been taken. One of the men claimed how the ship looked like a hospital or doctor's office inside. He also claims how a metal plate was placed over his chest whilst they scraped skin from his body. Following hypnosis, each person took a polygraph test and every single person passed. Many have tried to explain why so many intelligent, stable people come forward with such stories after experiences. After all, they'd be risking a hell of a lot if it was found out to be lies. Surely something must have happened on these occasions. Similar cases like this can be found all over the world. Of course, nobody can be 100% sure exactly that such an incident or event did in fact take place. It still baffles many professionals every year. There could be a perfectly normal explanation, but the evidence and testimonies to some of these stories leaves it a hard one to decide and exactly what could have taken place on those nights. That's just 2 separate cases 400 miles apart, with a 15-year gap. Have you ever had an experience that's been unexplainable at the time? Or have you ever seen any strange lights in the sky near you? If you have, please let us know in the comments section below. Until the next video, stay safe, and we'll see you next time for another episode of But Did You Know?